Hello everyone, welcome back to my SDL2 on Xcode series. In this tutorial project, we are going to build the class snake game on Xcode using C and SDL2. This is episode 6. In this episode, we are going to use the font we loaded last time to show some text on the screen. To do so, let's go to the Ep06, and you can see that our structure has something called texture. Now this time, we are not going to load something from the texture manager. We're going to do the following. We're going to first of all get the font manager so that we can get the font we have. And then we are going to use a helper function called font create text, which I'm going to explain later, to create some texture using the given font and the text to render and also the color. And you can see that the color is in the format of 0x and then $R, $G, $B, $A. And that represents the RGBA channels. And in this case, we have RGB to be 0. That means we have black color. And then also the A channel is FF, meaning that it is opaque. Let's try to take a look at the result. Now you can see that we have some text called snake on the screen, which is good. Now, this function will create something new, a new texture. In order to manage the memory correctly, we should clear up the texture before we leave the scene. So that's what we did using SDL destroy structure and also set it to be null. The render part is the same. We just query the size of the texture and then render it at the given rectangle. So that is the that's how we put a text on a screen. But what actually this function does? Well, let's go to the definition and see what happened there. In this function, we will do some checking first to make sure that we have valid font and text. And then we will convert this color code to SDL color structure. To do this one just requires some bit operation, which I have defined above here. You can see that I have two functions that will convert the code to SDL color and also convert the SDL color to the code. Now, let's come back to here. Once I get the font, I get the text and also the color, then I can use the function from the SDL TTF library called TTF render text blended. It will take in a font, a text, and also the color. And it will give back a surface that contains the rendered text. And here is more error tracking. And finally, if we have the surface, we're going to convert this surface to a texture using this function here. We're going to create a texture out of this function. And this function will take in a renderer from our engine and also the surface. The surface is from here. After we successfully convert the surface, we should get the desired texture. And that is the texture we're going to return. And that is how we create some texture from some sort of given font, text, and color. Now, since we are going to do this a lot, because we have a lot of text on our game. We have label, we have information showing the status of the game, for example, showing the scores of the game and showing game over text or etc. To do so, I'm going to wrap this into a structure called label that will take care of render text and also handle maybe user interaction. If you look at this structure, it is quite long. It can be divided into 4 parts, 1, 2, 3, 4 here. The first part is actually the basic definition of our label. It contains the text we are going to displace, and then some control boolean showing whether the label is enabled and whether it is visible. Here, if you set it to be not enabled, then it is actually the same as half visible. And also we need to specify the area we should put the text. In here, I set the label text max length to be 32. because I think 32 should be long enough to hold most of the labels. You can change this number to a higher one if you like. Next, let's look at the next part. The next part is about the foreground, or about the text. So there's a foreground texture fields here that will override all the setting here. If there's a foreground texture that's set to not null, then it will ignore all this information as well as all this information here. So if you don't want to have some text that is created from some font and color and don't want the background, you will just set this one to the texture you like. And if this one is null, then it will use the function called font create text I just showed you a moment ago to create a texture that will be stored in here. And that will be used to display on the screen. The next part is about the background. We have a boolean to control whether we should show the background. And then again, we have something called the background texture that will override the setting here. If this is set, then we are not going to look at this border or border color or background color. It will just render this texture. Otherwise, if we use this background color to draw a rectangle, and maybe use this border color to draw some border around this rectangle, and then we will then draw this text on top of this background, and that is the render logic for this label. The final section of the structure is about the callback and the callback data when we try to implement the label as a button, right? If this is set to not null, and also the label is enabled, then when we click the label, we will call this callback function with the callback data. We are going to see some example like this later. Now that is the structure of our label. And here there are some functions that help us to handle the label. And there were a lot of them, and I'm only going to explain some of them, which include the init function, the clear function, and the render function, and with these two functions to handle the label as a button. So let's try to go to the initialization part. To initialize a label, we will need three things. The given label that we need to initialize, the fonts that we would like to put in this label, and also the text. Now, we are going to do some default setting. We set it to be visible, the background is also visible, and the label is also enabled. For other things, we will set it all null, meaning that we don't have it set yet. And then for the text color, by default, we are going to use white, and for the background color, by default, we are going to use black. And then we set the font, and then we call the function wtLabel set text. That will set the text to the label correctly, and then generate the texture that we store in here. And if you go to the wtLabel set text in here, you can see that after we copy the text into our label, we're going to use this function to create the text for the label create text. It is here. If you look at this function, it is actually a function that wraps around this font create text I explained in the beginning of this tutorial. Next, you can see that there was some setter function, but they are not all. The reason why we have this set function is that we have some fields that start with underscore. These fields are not meant to be set directly, and they should use the dedicated setters function here. For other fields, you can directly manipulate them using member as access. Let's go back to here. And this is the init function. Since we create some texture that we'll store in here, we should be careful when we try to clear the label. We should make sure that the memory is free after this label is no longer used. Then The next important thing is the render function. For the render function, we first check that whether or not we want to show the label, and then, as I said, if we have the foreground texture set, we're going to render this foreground texture and then return, and we're not going to render the background and the foreground. You can see that this label render texture is actually a function that wraps around SDL render copy. So you just can think of this function as a render copy function that will render the foreground texture at the given area here, and that's what it does. And then if this is null, then we need to render the background on our own and then draw the text on this background. And that is the logic of the label render. I'm not going to go into details about these two functions again because they are quite similar and quite simple to understand. So you should read the code here on your own and see what they do. And now finally, we would like to look at two sets of functions here. These two functions will make our label clickable. The first function here is to check whether or not our function is clicked if we click the position x and y. Basically, it uses a function called wPoint in rectangle to determine whether or not the point xy is within this rectangle. To do this checking is not too hard. You just need to make sure that xy is in the range of the rectangle divided by this SDL rect, and that is this part. The next part is how we handle the click. Well, first of all, we need to make sure that the label is enabled. Also, we have the callback, and also the click is happening within the label area. Or otherwise, we just return and do nothing. And then we will call the callback function on the callback data, and that's the logic for us to handle the click on a label. Now let's go back to our f function and then do some experiment. Since we're going to use label and we're not going to handle the texture on our own, so let me replace this one by label. Now instead of using this, we're going to do the following. So let me delete it now. So for now, let me say use wlabel init to initialize our label, and then put in our label. The font is loaded here, and for the text, let me say do the snake again. And to clear it, we should use wtLabel clear to clear the memory claimed by the label. And to render it, we are going to, so let me delete the unnecessary drawing here. So let me replace it by label render, and then scene label. So let's see what will be drawn on the screen. You can see that there's nothing here. The reason is that we have not yet set the area of the label. To do this, we are going to have two ways to set up the area. One simple way is to give the position of the label, the upper left corner of the label. So set position, and then we are going to set the position, say to be 100 and 100. And that will set up the area, and then we will see the label on the screen. Now you can see that we have the default black background and also the default white text color. Now another way to control the area is to change the area directly like this. Now we're going to change it to some rectangle we designate. Let me say let the width to be 150, long enough to hold the text, and then 50. So let's see. Now we should have the bigger area, but you can see that the text will be centered in this box. Now let's try to change the color of the background. Let me say I would like to have a blue background. To do so, I just need to change the background color to be blue. Blue mean R will be 0, G, B, and this. So let me say I would like to set the label border to be not none. So that means I would like to have label border solid. And then let me set the border color to red. That is a red color. And let's see what happened. Now you can see that we have a blue background, and we have also the red box here, the border here. What if I don't want the background at all? Then to control that, I just simply make the alpha channel to be 0, and that won't show up the background color. And that will let you to have only the border with the text. And because our text color is white, so if you draw this white text on the white background, you are not going to see it. So let me just try to set the color of our text to other color. Say set text color to be, let me set it to be label. Let me set it to be green. Green means this one. So that would be a green text. Now we should have a red box with the green text center in the box here. And that's how we control the drawing of this. Now we can actually try to set the foreground as well. We are going to see what happens if I set the foreground texture. To that, I'm going to set it to be, say, I'm going to get the texture manager, and then let me draw an apple in this box. If I set the foreground texture, then all this setting will be useless because this will override all the setting above. You can only see the apple. And you can see that this apple is stretched because the render function will try to fill the foreground texture in the whole area, and that is the reason. So let me stop doing this. Now, the next thing we would like to talk about is, let me see. We should talk about the callback. So let's try to make this label clickable. For that, let me try to define a function, static void, and then label click. And then this will take in a data as our call function. And then here, we are going to set the label callback to be this label click, like this. And then, but we are going to implement this before we can compile it. So let me do something extremely simple. Let me just print out some message. Hello, snake. And let's try and see if we can actually click the label. If we click it, there is nothing going on here. It is because we have not yet handled the event here. In order to make this work, we also need to make sure that we handle the click event. To do so, I'm going to hook in the mouse button down, and then we will get the X position of the click by doing event button and that X. And then for the Y coordinate, I should have event button and then Y. Then we're going to do wlabel handle click and for our label at the position X and Y, because that is the position where we clicked our mouse. And that would be the, give me a second. Case, what is going wrong here? mouse button down. I think that is correct. And then we have int x set to be the event button.x. So why this is not correct? Let me try to do a little bit change, and then I don't see the problem right away. So let me change this directly. Let me see if it will run correctly. Now it ran correctly. I am not sure what happened there. Now if I click this one, you can see that we have a debug message saying that the label is clicked at this point, and we have the message going out here. If we click other area that is not within this area, it won't react. But if we click this, it will react. And that's how we handle the callback and how we make this label into a button. Remember that you, other than set up the callback function, you also need to handle the click in your handle event function. Next, let me show you how to use the callback data. So let me say that I don't want to print the fixed message. Instead, I would like to set the message here, hello world. I would like to print this one instead of the hello snake. And if I would like to change the message, I would just need to change this. In order to achieve this, all you need to do is to go to here and then change this one to print s, and then change this one to this data to charge, and that will work. Now when we click this label here, we have hello world, and then if I would like to change the message, I don't need to change the function itself. I just need to change this callback function. For example, let me change it back to hello snake, and then if I run it, and then if I click the label, then I should have hello snake back. And that's how we do the handle the label click in this way. That is for this episode. Hope to see you soon.